welcome to this summit. I want to begin by picking up something that the chairman has just said. It is this concept that sustainability and working towards net zero is actually a business agenda and not some high-minded moral cause. Now, I think it is a high-minded moral cause, but leaving that aside, the fact is it is our business agenda, and it is a business agenda which is very clear. I met somebody the other day who said I overheard him say to someone else, well, if you don't have sustainability in your business program, you won't have a business in 10 years' time. Just simply that. Because the word sustainability, after all, is exactly what it says. I always remember the chairman of Coca-Cola saying to me when one day we did a lot of work for him in Sancroft, and he said to me, my definition of sustainability is being here in 125 years' time, just like we've been here for 125 years. And I think there's a lot to be said for that very simple concept, that sustainability is actually about recognising the world as it is and the world in which we have to work, rather than some world that we used to be in or a world that we'd like to be in. Businessmen who work as if it is the world they'd like to be in go bust even more quickly than those who work in the world that they used to be in. We have to work in the world in which we are. And that world demands of us a series of challenges which we haven't had to face before. And the big problem is that human beings know. We actually are intellectual beings. And because we know, we are responsible for what we know. I have said this before, but not to this audience, but when I first became very active in the whole issue of climate change, my eldest son was busy writing the standard book on the Black Death. And as each chapter came off the computer, of course, as father, I had to be the first person to read it. And the thing that was fascinating was the difference between the Black Death and climate change. The Black Death killed 1 in 3 of the population, but nobody knew why. So they were not responsible for it. Actually, they gave it to each other because it was it was something which it was human beings passed it on. It wasn't anything to do with rats. It was actually human beings. And they therefore did all the wrong things. They all went to meetings and they all went to pilgrimages and they all cried it in churches and gave it to each other again. But they didn't know, so they weren't responsible. Now, the problem with climate change is we do know, and we are responsible. And if we don't take that responsibility, then the fact of the matter is that we will destroy the world as we know it. And because we know, and because we are responsible, we are going to be increasingly expected to take this responsibility on board. So whatever we think about it, the public out there are going to demand it of business. Oh, they'll demand it of the minister, of course. They'll demand it of politicians in general, which is something Mr. Jenrick ought to learn about pretty quickly. The fact of the matter is that they will, of course, yes, they will demand it of their elected politicians, but they'll also have expected business to have done this. So first of all, we're going to be expected to meet this. And secondly, we're not going to be able to fulfill our business needs unless we recognise that in the world in which we live, whether we like it or not, the issues of climate change are going to be increasingly predominant. When people say to me, well, I'm not quite sure about climate change, there's all sorts of worries and concerns. And, I think there are some people who don't quite accept the science and all that. I always say to them, it doesn't matter what you think. What you have to accept in business is what other people think. We're selling into a marketplace, and other people are very clear about what's happening. So you can have any view you like about climate change, but don't run your business on the basis of your views of climate change. Run the business on the views of people out there who are actually going to make the life and the business parameters in which you have to work. So in this organisation, the Council for Net Zero Transport, we start by being vulgarly business oriented. That's what it's about. It's about making our businesses successful by recognising the world in which we live and recognising the facts which we know. Now, of course, we also recognise the difficulties in the way. And one of the things I find very illuminating is that if I look at the world going back to when I started as chairman of the Climate Change Committee, going back 13 or so years, I would never have imagined then that we could have moved as fast as we have. If I look forward from where we are now, I have to say there's a hell of a lot to do. It's very, very tough what we've got to do. But it's good for us every now and again to remind ourselves of how much we have done. And the hour-long information which the chairman put before you is just another example of how much is being done, and that should keep us spurred for what has to be done. Sometimes we have to cheer ourselves up before we actually get down to how much has to be done. And what has to be done is very clear. And here I have a warning. The Minister hid from us one awful fact, and that is that if you decarbonise the generation of electricity by 2030, the contribution of emissions by the transport industry becomes more and more obvious, because you've removed the biggest area of emissions, and so agriculture and transport and the built environment become the three areas which are going to be absolutely constantly in the public mind. So the more the government is successful in doing that, the more we become very central as the next stage. But the good news is that there is a way down through which we can go for the transport industry. Much more difficult when you look at agriculture, because they don't really yet have an answer. Much more difficult when you look at the built environment, because they too have a series of very complicated answers to what has already been built. They've got an answer to what you may build in the future, although the house builders don't seem to have caught on to it yet, but there is an answer for the future, but not for the present. As far as we're concerned, there is an answer, and it's an answer which can be brought into operation much more quickly than those two other extremely important areas. Because, first of all, we change our vehicles more regularly than we change our houses and our buildings. Secondly, because our technology has developed so much more extensively. And thirdly, because there is a general acceptance of the technological steps which have to be taken. We're not arguing except at the edges as to what we do. And the Net Zero Transport Council's desire is to get rid of all the barriers for doing this as quickly as possible, because speed is of the essence. And that indeed is the theme which Louise Haigh, the Transport Secretary of State, has made so clear. So what should we be doing when we're looking at our businesses in practical terms? I think there are three things which I would ask you all to do. First of all, to look again at the business from the point of view where you are and think to yourselves, where should I be in 2030? Just take that period. Where should I be if I'm going to be successful and profitable and on the way to being more successful and more profitable? I've run businesses all my life, except at the time in which I was a minister, and I do think that the only way that you run the business successfully is to do that for yourself. How do I get myself into a position in which I can continue to be profitable, and how can I make myself more profitable, and can I be vulgar about this? Because we're in business to make profits, and that's why we're there. And we make profits by providing services and products which people want to buy. And that's how we do it. So let's ask ourselves, what do we have to do with our businesses in order that we shall do that? And what changes do we have to make? And having thought that through, we have to, secondly, I think, to do something which the Council wants to know. What are the things that stop us? Because an awful lot of these things can be put right. What are the things that are in the way? Not the general moan of people who read the Daily Telegraph, which is that somehow or other there aren't enough plugs, or electric cars don't really work, or any of the other arguments that the Daily Telegraph pours out once a week, every week. What we have to do is to say to ourselves specifically what gets in the way. Now, let me give a single example. There are bus garages which can't have electric buses because they can't actually fuel the electric buses, because we have a system which doesn't provide the electrical connections that are necessary. That's an obvious barrier. We want to know not only the generality of that, but we want to know the particularities of that, because it enables us to help the government to do what it wants to do. And this government has the best view and the best ideals in mind. It has one problem: it has to deliver them. And frankly, if I'm being as generous as I can be, because I support its policies very strongly, I also have to say it doesn't yet show that it's good at delivery, and we've got to help it to be good at delivery. And that means let's really be tough about what are the things that get in the way, what are the things that we can put right in order to make it possible for us to be profitable in 2030. And I only put 2030 because that's a reasonable period of time for us to be looking forward. And the third thing that I want us all to do is to see how best we can cooperate with other parts of the industry. This is not something we're going to do on our own. We're going to do it, and the Minister mentioned it, we're going to do it together. So who are the partners that we need, both inside and outside the industry? And we, in the Council for Net Zero Transport, want your help in making sure that we make those contacts and make those associations which are so necessary. And that's why we have built this Strategic Advisory Committee. We've done it because we want everybody to feel that they are part of this and have a say in it, whether they are representing a tiny bit of industry or a very large and broad coalition. So all of them are invited, and we're going to listen to them very carefully. But very often it's an individual who recognises what is the connection point that's necessary. Where is it not quite working? And we want to know that. I've always tried in government, I've never managed to achieve it yet, I will one day, which is I want to have not a centre for better regulation. I want somewhere where when you see something that gets in the way of achieving growth, you can go to it and get it put right. I want something at the heart of government that would do that. Because we all come across these things. We all know them. We moan to our wives if they're prepared to listen yet again, or indeed our husbands, or we moan in the clubs or in the pub, but we don't actually have a means of getting over what those things are. So the Council for Net Zero Transport is going to be, I'm sorry to say for all my colleagues, going to be the centre where we actually don't moan, but tell us and see how we're going to achieve that. And in this agenda, we have made very clearly, the agenda for today, the determination to talk about the things that we are going to do, rather than the generality of the need to do it. But I always believe that at every meeting we should remind ourselves of just how crucial this is. I read in Nature the other day a piece of news which I have never seen before, and it's about bumblebees. The bumblebee, we have 150 different sorts. It's a bee which only exists in temperate climes. We think that it is declining sharply because of the way in which we've used pesticides and the way in which we have removed habitat. But they have now discovered that it's declining for another reason, that it is very sensitive to small increases in temperature. And the increase in temperature means that it can't smell properly, and so it can't find the flowers, so it can't eat, and it can't pollinate. It is the most important pollinator that we have. I tell the story simply because climate change is reaching every single part of our lives. If we don't pollinate, we can't grow crops. If we don't have the interaction in biodiversity, which is so essential, we won't be able to feed ourselves. I just think that all the time we should remind ourselves of just how serious that is. That's why net zero is crucial. So if Kemi Badenoch says she's not a climate skeptic, but she's a net zero skeptic, that is rubbish. You cannot divide the two. We either fight for net zero in 2050, or this world will have run away with itself, and we will be living in a wholly different atmosphere which will threaten everything in which we believe and about which we care. Now, that's the only bit that I shall put in just to remind us of how serious our situation is. But it has an upside. First of all, we can deal with it. Secondly, because we know and are responsible, we can deal with it, and it gives us a place in the world which is more important, perhaps, than we sometimes recognise. And the third thing that it does is that it enables us to build a cleaner, greener, kinder, better world. And I do want us all the time to recognise that what we're trying to do will make the world better. It isn't a miserable story. This isn't about being cold or not travelling much. It isn't about that at all. It's creating a world in which we live well without costing the earth. That's what we're going to do. And if we do it in the transport industry, we will have made a major contribution to what we have to do as a nation and as a world. And in that sense, it gives us a place and a position and a vocation which makes our lives really worthwhile.